Hello and welcome back to another live stream of Dragon Plus / Design Plus. With me now, as always, whoops, and I have made a faux pas immediately by not turning the sound off on my computer. It's like on sports radio; they're always yelling at the person to turn your phone
I know,
down.
like Bart, are you watching TV while we do the show?
No, I was because I was just rewatching the PAX South Acquisitions Incorporated live game.
Perfect segue.
Yes, which I wanted to ask how that went. I don't know if you want to give any spoilers away, but from the previous live game, cliffhangers were resolved, journeys potentially back home were facilitated. And things ended with yet another bit of a story cliffhanger.
I don't want to spoil anything because people who haven't watched it on YouTube yet, and
Yes.
it is available on YouTube,
Yes.
won't have seen yet how
Okay.
the previous episode's cliffhangers were resolved. Suffice it to say, it was super fun. The players were awesome. They had especially great chemistry. They kept surprising me as a DM. I had a whole lot of stuff prepared that just didn't happen,
Yes.
which to me is never a bad thing as a DM.
Yes.
I love getting to the end of a session and I'm like, wow.
My pockets are still full.
Yeah,
I didn't take out half of this.
and all sorts of things happen that I didn't expect. And then I can take some of the stuff I prepared and use it another time. And yes, we ended on yet another crazy cliffhanger. And it was satisfying for me that the cliffhanger was so surprising to some of the players that they even on stage were like,
Yes.
no, we can't end there.
Well, they had a bit of a vested interest in where things went from
Yes,
there.
yeah.
I was also just rewatching Jim and Omen feigning an interrogation.
It is both very funny and very dark at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So I've got the chat has been asking while we were waiting to queue up here, what's better, a dungeon or a dragon?
Oh, well, I think the best is a dungeon with a dragon in it.
Okay. Ampersand apparently was also a choice.
Yeah. So yes, I chose the ampersand. Bring them together.
That's 2 for ampersands. How about Whelm, Wave, or Black Razor, apropos of...
Ooh, nice. Yeah, because one of those, for those of you who haven't seen the latest Acking episode, one of those 3 weapons makes a surprise appearance.
Yes.
I have a soft spot in my heart for Black Razor, simply because as a kid, when I saw the illustration of it in the original White Plume Mountain,
Yes.
I just thought, oh, that looks so cool. Plus, it's like Stormbringer.
See, I had never read Elric, I had never read Stormbringer, but I was the exact same way. I saw the sword, and the way that it was described as sort of a window into a starry sky somewhere else, it didn't have to do anything else.
Right.
It was wildly overpowerful as well, but it was still very, very cool.
Yeah, sword as Starscape. I'm sold.
And I found that as both player and dungeon master, it's occasionally the mechanics that will allure a player to keeping or using a weapon, but it's just as often the story or the aesthetics of a thing that is going to keep it on their persons.
Oh yeah, I mean, because even in the tabletop game, you see what so many of us have experienced in video games, and that is so much of it is about dress up. It's about getting that cool thing and imagining your character wearing it or wielding it, or showing it off or giving it as a gift.
Of course.
Yes.
So Jeremy Crawford, lead designer of the Player's Handbook and lead rules designer of Dungeons and Dragons. As mentioned in the past couple of weeks, we're going to be having Jeremy on more regularly. Last week, we did miss our regularly scheduled appointment because of inclement weather.
Yeah, we were huddled at home while abominable snowmen growled by.
Not that I don't appreciate a snow day every so often, but I looked out and there was nothing on the ground. on Wednesday when they had called off
Really?
Seattle school district.
Oh, because see, where I lived, it was snowy.
Yes, so that was brought to my attention.
Yeah.
There is a bigger part of Seattle than West Seattle. The entire Seattle school district also has to be taken into account.
Well, and any time there's snow, there's always a good chance that Capitol Hill, where I live, will get more than other parts of the city, partly just because of higher elevation.
Right.
And then you combine that with our really steep streets, and some of them are narrow 19th century streets.
Yes.
That then also get covered with a sheet of ice, and oh boy, you are best off staying at home on those days and not risking slipping and sliding around into a telephone pole.
As a dungeon master, do you or how do you incorporate weather into your games? Now, dungeons, of course, are their own thing, but they're the indoor stadium of D&D. Right. Do you take things to the exterior fairly often, or how do you play with that?
So in my home game in particular, I spend at least half the time doing wilderness encounters, sometimes more than half, or urban encounters, on city streets and whatnot. And I often like to describe the weather because weather can be a great mood piece. You can get people into a particular mood, whether you describe a dreary, rainy day or a glimmering spring morning. Already those two descriptions are going to put your group in a different mood. It's then fun to use the weather as a game effect. Suddenly the streets are slippery because of the downpour. Or on a long trek through the wilderness because of the high heat and the sunlight, people might be getting dehydrated quicker. I might not do any real concrete game effect in the case of like dehydration, but sometimes just describing that will put the players on edge and heighten the drama. And usually that's what I'm aiming for. Let's heighten the drama and let's also make it immersive. Let's make people feel like they're there. And a big part of being in a place in our world is weather.
And for the players, I know as well, it's also just a good improv hook where the weather is this, they'll spin it in their own way. Well, my character is going to be acting this way or looking for this or however they want to take things in that area.
Weather is also a great way to create excuses for certain types of monsters to show up. Like if there's a sudden unexpected snowfall in a city like we just had in Seattle, well, that might be a way to incorporate some snow-themed monsters in an environment that you wouldn't normally see them. Like typically people will encounter white dragons, for instance, high up in snow-capped mountains. But what if there's a snowpocalypse like we just had in a city and a white dragon wanders into town? So again, you can do some fun stuff like that, change the situation, play with people's expectations because of changes in weather.
Or of course, why is the weather this way? And why is it encroaching on the town? Why are the druids mad at us? And what are they trying to bring into the city, or whatever the hook is?
So right before Christmas at home, I ran the first of a two-part one-shot, the first episode of a two-part one-shot. And we'll be doing the second episode, I think, next week. And it's funny, it's almost like, Bart, have you been reading my notes? Because weather is actually crucial to the story. And I was partly inspired by our inclement weather, and also just how weather is in Seattle every winter. There is a mysterious snowstorm, and a big part of the adventure is figuring out why, and can they stop it? Because one of also the fun things in D&D is if you have magical weather, you can make it over the top. This is snow that's piling up way faster than it would in the real world. Things are icing over, like visibly, like you can see the ice forming. I always love it when in the games I'm playing or running, or when I see other DMs really embracing the fantasy of D&D and realizing, you're not bound by how these things work in the real world. You can push it, really amp up the drama, the excitement, the horror, the humor.
I might be stating the obvious, but for my players at least, half of the fun is the first part of figuring out what is happening And then the second part, well, okay, let's make the action to make the day right or what have you. But just the mystery of something is wrong or off is a lot of fun. I've not been reading your notes, but I have been eating your Tim Tams.
Oh, yes.
I opened your bag of Tim Tams. I was starving yesterday.
Thank you. If you're watching, the fan from Down Under who sent Tim Tams to the office through me, it's very appreciated.
Yes. Those are good cookies. I have not
super
had
tasty.
Tim Tams before.
I forgot that in some countries calories are calculated differently. And so I read the energy, because it's called energy on the package, and it was per cookie, it was like 438, and I thought that was calories. And I was like, oh my God, we're going to all end up with diabetes eating these cookies.
These are 2 Pop-Tarts condensed into a wafer.
But then I went online and did a conversion, like, oh, okay, these cookies are safe to eat.
But on that note, it's also Girl Scout cookie season, which is bad news for me and my household.
Yeah, I've got to pretend that's not happening. Otherwise, I'm going to end up with a freezer half full of Thin Mints.
We've had this discussion.
Yes, we have.
The garbage cookie of the Girl Scout. It's s'mores. It's the s'mores of the cookie. Well, let's get to your questions. What we wanted to do was circle back around to some of the unanswered questions that we had from the last few discussions and Unearthed Arcanas. And in recent days, we've also just dropped another Unearthed Arcana that we do need to get into. Available now on many parts of the website.
Yeah, dnd.wizards.com.
We were fighting with some of our indexing, but you can look for Subclasses Part 1 there with a super cool, maybe just because I play a Warlock a lot, a super cool Warlock.
The Noble Genie.
Well. So let me start off with a couple of your questions. If you do have another question, please do put it in the chat. Please do preface it with question. We do compile them as we go along the way. I know we've been babbling on, but we'll also have one giveaway that will be taking place during this live stream. I've got an unopened copy of the D&D Essentials Kit, so for anyone looking to get their hands on that, we'll be giving away a copy. Let's Jappleton, because we liked his name. This is in regards to the Unearthed Arcana class feature variants, and Jappleton asked, we talked a little bit about the feedback and survey process generally last time, specifically for the class feature variants. Has the feedback overall been generally positive or negative in regards to the versatility and buyer's remorse that it seeks to rectify?
So the class feature variant UA received, I think, more playtest feedback than any UA we've ever done.
Wow.
And was also one of the most positively received Unearthed Arcanas we have ever done. And so the short answer is yes. People have really taken to those versatility features, and they want them.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And I mean, because as always, we're ready for people to not want them, or say, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. But with these, they were like, yes, give us this ability to modify our characters over the course of a campaign, because I think many people have found exactly what I've mentioned on one of our previous episodes, that campaigns advance at different paces. And sometimes if you go by just what's in the player's handbook, you might be waiting a long time if your character has to wait for a level up to change something.
Right.
And then in a few cases in the player's handbook, we don't even give you the ability to change something. So I think people are really excited about gaining this ability in a potential future product.
Yes, versatility is a good fun thing. I play Dragonwood with my family. It's a card game. You draw cards, you got the same color, number, blah, 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 which is fine. But at some point during the game, the house rule is, well, what if I started trading cards? Well, now I've got more versatility in my hand, and it makes the game a little bit more fun.
Yeah.
I don't have to wait just for my turn to draw another card.
Yeah.
So there you go, Jappleton. TP Kill has a question. This is in regards, again, to the class feature variants, specifically regarding spellcasting. Why do you think that the cleric cantrip spell list would bring more possibilities to the paladin? Guidance aside, no paladin would change his smite possibility for a sacred flame, for example. So why give the paladin cantrip versatility?
That is a great question, and I was hoping you would answer that question. Ask me that question, partly because there are really two things to address. One is there are people who play paladins who simply want, again, here we're going to go to the versatility theme, they're going to want the versatility that access to that cantrip list gives them. It can be difficult to remember sometimes, especially if you're in a group that prioritizes combat over exploration and social interaction in the game, that there are groups that actually highly value social interaction in their role-playing and exploration, and might value the versatility that you get from things like utility cantrips more than they might value upping their damage a little bit. And so really that leads to the other part of this question I wanted to address. We always have to be careful as fans, not only of D&D, of really of anything, of projecting our taste onto the entire fandom. Because one thing the D&D Next process taught us, and that we learn over and over and over again in every Unearthed Arcana we do, is that the D&D audience is wonderfully diverse and likes many different ways of playing. And so if you see something that's not to your taste, that's fine, because there's usually something else that is. And sometimes people will have what is to me a mystifying anxiety about someone else enjoying something they don't like. And the key is just enjoy the thing you enjoy. And D&D is a big enough game that it can accommodate many tastes.
Is this another Star Wars discussion?
No, I'm not going to like suddenly pull back the curtain and say, now Bart, we're going to interrogate your very strong opinions about Star Wars. No, again, I think particularly in D&D, where we consciously have given options that appeal to different play styles and different ways of building characters, it's natural that everyone is going to come across something that's just not for them. That's actually by design. As long as you are finding some things in the game where you read it and you're like, that's awesome, that's for me, then our design is succeeding. Because our design goal is not that everything is for everybody.
Right.
Instead, our goal is design something in the game to appeal to as many varied D&D tastes as possible.
Or again, not mechanically optimized. There might be story reasons or other reasons that you would like to craft your character in a particular way.
And even there, we have to be careful, because often people will say, like, optimization, and really what they mean is how much damage they deal in combat.
Yes,
forgetting,
that's what I meant.
Yeah, exactly. Forgetting that being optimal mechanically can mean different things in different D&D campaigns, because you might be in a D&D campaign where your group's victory is not measured by how many monsters you slay and how quickly you slay them. It might instead be how many warring factions have you persuaded to pursue peace. It might, or in another campaign might be, how good are you at solving different mysteries? And some of that might be resolved in play through role-playing, but it might instead be resolved through use of skills, use of non-combat class features. There's a lot in the game that speaks to non-combat, and there are many campaigns where there's non-combat abilities will actually see more use and have ultimately more plot impact than the fact that Clara the Paladin is able to deal one additional more point of damage per hit than the other character next to her.
Greg Tito just ran us through a one-shot on Friday where it was investigation. It was exactly that.
Yeah.
You needed to use your deductive reasoning and animal handling, as it turned out. And there was no combat up until, I think, the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, and think about it. If somebody, through clever role play and use of skills like persuasion or deception or performance, is able to essentially make a battle not happen, that is a way more powerful ability than +1 per hit or
Yeah.
+2 per hit. You know, and again, I'm not saying that exactly, but sort of that kind of thing.
Right.
And so anyone out there who is sort of mathing it, be very careful, because remember, there is way more to the game than going toe-to-toe with monsters with your weapons out and your spells prepared, even though that is also an awesome part of the game.
Yes.
And this is why I love D&D, that all of those experiences can feed into an amazing D&D playthrough.
I was just looking at the chat really quickly. Jappleton is in the chat today, so we hopefully answered your question to your satisfaction. I see Elwarius as well. I will answer your question offline. And then this one was off topic, but it struck me as an interesting one. Where did it go? For Dungeon Masters and how you might run the game. Now, I'm sure your players wouldn't do this. But Zool asks, they are running the Tomb of Annihilation, or take any dungeon scenario. Their players have reached the tomb, and it's clear that one of them has read the adventure. How, as a Dungeon Master, might you handle that? Make the traps deadlier, leave them as is, remove the player, something else entirely?
I would feel it out. So if the player is clearly having a good time, and they're not spoiling other people's time by sharing the knowledge they have, you could possibly run the adventure as written. If they're a fun person to play with, but their knowledge is bubbling out of them and disrupting play.
Don't step there. I just, trust me, I have a feeling.
Right. If that's going on, then I would say DM, don't hesitate to just change things. Play with their expectations. I love doing this. So the thing is, I actually delight in it when I know that somebody has read something I'm running, because then I mess with them.
And there are, I mean, sometimes it's just, there are some classic adventures out there that a lot of us have run and read, but we want to play them as well.
Yeah. So I did this recently in my home campaign. The group went to Castle Ravenloft, 200 years after the events of Curse of Strahd. Two of my players were Chris Perkins and James Wyatt. Chris, who worked with me on Curse of Strahd, James Wyatt, who worked on Expedition to Castle Ravenloft in 3rd edition. These are players who know that castle inside and out.
Yes. They have a poker game with Strahd every session.
So what I did is I used that knowledge against them because their things were not where they expected them to be in the castle. Plus, 200 years had passed, and a lot was going on in that castle that they did not expect. I mean, including when they got to the crypts and discovered it had been converted into a large refrigeration unit, and all the crypts instead had barely alive people hanging on hooks. Just preserved a way for the vampires to feed on them. I mean, it was just one thing after another like that. So you can actually turn a player's familiarity with a published module into a fun thing of subverting their expectations and then creating a fun, surprising experience. Because keep in mind, I say this often, the people who haven't read it have no idea what's on the page.
Right.
So DMs never hesitate to change things, because I always feel for DMs and want to give them a hug when they feel like, oh my gosh, I have to run it as written. It's like, you don't. You don't have to run it as written. Your players don't have the text in front of them, even if they did. Your job is not to be sort of a mouthpiece for what is on the page. Your job is to take what's on the page, be inspired by it, and run the adventure you want to run. And just have a ball with it.
I was going to say, and Tomb of Annihilation is a bit of an odd choice there, because that actually does take and subvert some of the text from Tomb of Horrors.
Right.
Knowing that some players will be familiar with it, and attempting to do exactly that.
Right.
Subvert a little bit of the expectations to the surprise and delight and challenge of the players who might be familiar with it.
So yeah, subvert the subversion. You could even, with Tomb of Annihilation, you could actually, if you're running for a group that has read Tomb of Annihilation, or have someone in the group, one of the many things you could do to subvert their expectations would be to run most of the situations the way they were in the original Tomb of Horrors,
Right.
which is going to be
back.
far more deadly.
So yes, so there you go. Yeah, that's I have not encountered players like that, except for folks that have read the adventures lovingly, and they are cursed with the knowledge of what the module contains.
Right.
Let's look at unimportant hero, and this is going to our psionics-based class features. Asks tangential. There's a tough word. Tangential to psionics because space. Why do you think contemporary D&D players are latching on to Spelljammer with such fascination, when it was largely seen as a weird stepchild of D&D in the olden AD&D 2E days? So why the nostalgia for a bit of an offshoot setting?
So first off, full disclosure, I loved Spelljammer when it came out, but that's partly because I like any expression of D&D that embraces the multiverse. It's why I also love Planescape, and Planescape and Spelljammer really are two ways of looking at the multi-world setting that is the D&D multiverse.
Yeah.
Planescape is really about journeying through the outer planes and the inner planes, whereas Spelljammer is much more focused on getting from one of the worlds in the material plane to another. And it's just cool having these magical ships soaring through space, visiting different worlds, and then if you combine that with trips to the outer planes, you can have a really marvelously trippy D&D experience. My theory for why people often bring up Spelljammer as well as Planescape as something they have loved from the past is because they dig the D&D multiverse. One of the things D&D has that many fantasy settings don't have is it has multiple worlds, these metaphysical dimensions you can visit, other planets. I mean, it has so much variety with all of these different subgenres of fantasy represented by the different worlds. There's really nothing quite like it in fantasy, because most fantasy settings just have a single world.
Right.
Whereas in D&D, we have many worlds, and the implication is, of course, that one of those worlds is your homebrew world out there.
Right.
That there is even a place for your homebrew in this multiverse.
Yeah, that's a good point. It has an equally valid place in the multiverse.
Yes.
There's many worlds and many ways to travel between them and reach them. That is also fascinating to the game as well.
Yeah, and what it means is that in D&D, literally the sky is the limit. Although even the sky is not a limit, since you can actually step out of your plane of existence into another. But you can go into the sky and find out what's out there, and go adventuring in another world, or alternatively spend your entire campaign on just one world and dig deep. But D&D, with its great breadth of opportunity for storytelling, allows you to go super deep in a single world. I mean, heck, you could do an entire campaign in a single, municipality. But alternatively, if you want, you can hop around from one plane of existence to another, from one world to another, travel around on a ship. I think people really more and more appreciate that side of D&D because it is something really precious and special about Dungeons and Dragons.
See, it's funny because for me, the point taken, it's about being able to access the multiverse. What might be some of the appeal to Spelljammer, and for me, it was like, what is this thing?
Of course, Bart.
I'm a Planescape guy, but I mean, ultimately, which is a very similar thing. It's
Right.
just how do you get to these different
Yeah.
worlds? Is it through magical means or through more, actual physical nautical means in a way?
Right, exactly. And it's okay for you to not totally dig, what Spelljammer is offering, because going back to what I was saying earlier, D&D again is so great that you decide what you're going to eat from the D&D buffet.
Yes.
It's okay for me to be over here getting a second helping of Spelljammer while you might be going back for thirds over there on the sigil plate.
See, I think back when I was second edition, it was like, I need my Dungeons and Dragons serious. It's serious dark fantasy. And now it's like, oh, that GIF looks fantastic. I'm putting him in a game somehow, somewhere.
Yeah. But here's the thing. You can still have super serious D&D, because if you want your story to be zeroed in on one world and its, hard scrabble existence for some of the people there, or the dark politics, or the dark magic that's occurring, all of that is also possible in D&D. If you want to ignore what's going on in the great beyond, you can.
All right. Well, there we go. We've got a few questions. We do have several more remaining, but what I thought we would want to do in the time remaining is at least pay a little attention to the most recent Unearthed Arcana that has come out. This is the first Unearthed Arcana of 2020. It is Subclasses Part 1, which immediately begs the question, is there going to be a Part 2?
I sure hope so. Otherwise, we were very confused when we put that Part 1 there.
But in Part 1, we cover subclass options for the Barbarian, the Monk, the Paladin, and as mentioned, the Warlock.
That's right.
So where would you like to maybe dabble in first?
Let's start from the top.
Okay.
And we go right into the Path of the Beast. This is a fun one for anyone who's ever wanted to play a character who might be descended from a lycanthrope or some other sort of shapeshifter, or maybe you were blessed by an ancient fey being to be able to adopt various animal aspects. This barbarian path gives you those juicy options. This was something we talked about in a design meeting a while ago. I was like, I'd really like to see this. Dan Dillon took it and ran with it, and then the team iterated on it, and we ended up with this. You get to sprout claws if you want, get a swimming speed, scramble up walls, leap far distance, infect people with your fury, give your friends some of your reckless attack. It's, I think, a ton of fun, and really is a way for a barbarian to take the sort of primal energy that we often talk about being an aspect of the barbarian, and wearing that on the outside. Because we often in narrative terms will refer to rage as being a sort of a feral fury, that kind of thing. Well, in this subclass, you literally become feral. You partially transform, and everyone's going to see it. So it is a very conspicuous form of rage, because you rage and then adopt these animal aspects. If anyone's wondering, how is this different from the Path of the Totem Warrior in the Player's Handbook? Well, the difference really is there in the conspicuousness. The Path of the Totem Warrior might have certain feral qualities to them, but ultimately the Totem Warrior is all about channeling a nature spirit of some kind and manifesting different abilities. Here in the Path of the Beast, you are literally becoming like these creatures, whether it's spawning a tail, or your nose elongating, this kind of thing. You are becoming pretty monstrous, and it's possible that a barbarian who follows this path might terrify townsfolk. There could be some stories where if the barbarian flies into the rage and transforms a bit, there could be villagers who might mistake this barbarian for a lycanthrope of some kind.
So you might have already touched upon this a little bit, but Clamlamity, it's not Calamity, it's Clamlamity. I like that. Had a question about, I suppose, the discussion process that goes in the back end about some of the classical archetypes that fit with the classes. So when we were talking about the barbarian and the lycanthrope, why the barbarian as opposed to, say, the ranger as a subclass for this?
So there are a number of subclasses that quite honestly could go into a number of different classes. And sometimes we actually do explore similar themes in subclasses for different classes. But when we don't do that and we just say we're going to take this theme and focus on this one class, it usually is about zeroing in on a particular aspect. And here we were zeroing in on bestial transformation and also really leaning into there being some element of it feeling a little dangerous. And those thematically, those bits relate very well to the barbarian's rage. Rage also gave us a mechanism for giving you this transformation that piggybacks on something you already have. So then, rage can serve as the conduit for this. Plus, again, the narrative of the barbarian versus the ranger is that barbarians are filled with this primal energy. Rangers, sometimes that's their story, but the ranger story traditionally has been much more, you are a person who is, at peace in the wilds and who is a survivor, whereas the barbarian might be a manifestation of the wilds. That to me that's the important difference. The ranger is the one who goes out into the far wilderness and befriends the beast there. The barbarian might be mistaken, especially this barbarian, for one of the beasts out there. And then the druid might pop up and say, "Hi, I was over here eating an acorn in squirrel form as I ponder the secrets of the universe." So we have these three different classes with all an important relationship to nature, but their relationship is different.
I would watch that movie like an Incredible Journey style trip through the wilderness with three very different classes of explorers.
Yeah.
All right. So that is the path of the beast for the barbarian. Anything else you wanted to add or touch quickly upon the monk?
The last thing I'll say about the path of the beast is going back to our theme of versatility. I love here that we give the player choice. You decide when you transform which of the transformation options you're going to use, because what we've done here is we've made it so that you have options that could be useful in and outside of combat. We often want to make sure that for certain class archetypes we are designing things that are useful in multiple pillars of the game, and again those pillars being exploration, social interaction, and combat. So the monk, the way of mercy.
The way of mercy.
This is a monk I've wanted us to actually explore for a while. Ben Petrosor took the lead here after we discussed having a monk that would, in many ways, lean more on sort of a European aesthetic than an Asian aesthetic. The monk has often relied on different Asian archetypes for its identity. And here we wanted, because Western Europe has had a long tradition of monks, but it's confusing because in Western Europe that word means a different thing.
Yes, very much so.
And we thought, well, what if we kind of merged these? And so what we started to explore is this idea of, imagine Europe during the Black Plague, and this figure who walks among the plague bearers wearing a potentially spooky mask, who with one hand is able to provide healing and another hand provide a different kind of mercy in the form of a quick death. And we specifically wanted to explore this in the monk because we wanted a character who was not a spellcaster, still using a mystical power source, in this case the monk's key, who would also have this sort of dual nature of life and death, the sort of those two different sides of mercy.
Interesting, because going back to Clam Lamity's question, sort of, it might have gone cleric, but you decided, I mean, it was decided, no, this feels more monk for this particular subclass.
Absolutely, because we already have healing covered in the cleric, and because any time we do anything for the cleric, healing is assumed. Because healing is always an option for a cleric when they're preparing their spells.
Right.
No, we specifically wanted to create a monk for somebody who might love what a monk offers, but wanted to like have a monk in sort of like a European friar's robe, who doesn't use weapons, has the unarmed fighting capabilities that the monk class offers, but marries those capabilities to this ability to provide the soothing, healing, or to hasten someone's death. And I feel this is a perfect place, the perfect class for this subclass.
So now that you say that, though, I now want to see that movie where it's a version of like Name of the Rose.
Yes.
But they have martial art abilities that they're
So Name of the Rose was, for me, one of the aesthetic inspirations when I first brought the idea of this to the team.
Great movie.
I love that movie, and those characters are called monks, and of course they're not the same as D&D monks, because although we don't know, they never have a fight. Maybe some of them are awesome in unarmed combat. And plus, what many people don't know is medieval Europe also had traditions of unarmed fighting. Not nearly as, in my opinion, beautiful as the traditions of unarmed fighting in the East, but the West also has traditions of unarmed fighting. So it is possible to have a monk who is a master at unarmed fighting, who does not necessarily have to have an Asian aesthetic.
No, they box old English style.
Yeah. They could be a pugilist, because we don't tell you in the monk class description that you are necessarily doing karate or kung fu or aikido or some other martial art from Asia. You might be a European style pugilist, or doing some of the unarmed fighting styles that the ancient Greeks deployed, or the Romans. There's a lot in the West as well that can be leaned upon in a class like the monk. But here again, this, for your touchstone, think of Plague Doctor. And by the way, the monk is one of the reasons also why we loved putting this in the monk is in some ways the perfect person to be wandering among the ill, because over time, monks' bodies just sort of become superhuman in their resilience.
They've been exposed too often to too many things.
You can imagine a monk and a paladin walking through, a disease-ridden city, and they're going to be fine.
The aesthetic of the plague mask has always been, I think, particularly compelling to fantasy fans as well.
Yeah.
What was the reason for?
I have not studied the reason. I mean, I can certainly guess, or we could Google it, but it could have been to dampen the odor, because one of the things we often forget is cities in centuries past often reeked because of maybe the sewage, although many of those cities actually had better sewage systems than we realize. It was tended to be the smaller towns that would have like open, sewage drains, that kind of thing. But also just because people did not bathe as much as they do now, so just the amount of body odor and also animal odor, because animals were around much more.
Sure.
And so if you're in a city, then you add on to all of that a city where there's plentiful death, because of some kind of epidemic. You can imagine wanting to, maybe have a perfumed mask on.
Sure.
That makes it so that you can withstand the reek.
A bit of a gas mask.
Yeah. I also like it too because since back then surgeons, sometimes were not entirely trusted because they might be showing up to, saw your arm off without anesthesia. You can also see why maybe they would wear masks. Now, this monk doesn't do that, but this monk does have the hands of harm, or this noxious aura, so watch out.
All right, so that is a quick look at the monk. Shall we touch upon the paladin? We've got 10 minutes remaining.
Yes, yeah. So the Oath of the Watchers.
Yes.
Some of the initial design here was done by Bill Benham, and then the team, we took it and sort of poked and prodded to explore this idea of a group of paladins who are essentially the watchers at the gate. And what I mean by that is they are guarding against extraplanar incursions, and they are especially good at going up against things like elementals, fae, fiends, aberrations, at banishing them, at turning them. They of course have other abilities that are good in other situations, but these are the paladins who are basically saying, don't come into this world and mess it up. Especially if you're a malign force like a fiend, they're going to say, get out of here. And I could see them, making nice, maybe with elementals and fae, unless those elementals and fae cross the line. But yeah, again, where this name comes from, the Oath of the Watchers, they are the watchers at the gate. And the gate here meaning really any pathway from an outer plane or an inner plane or the Feywild or the Shadowfell into the material plane.
I can imagine like a Men in Black style or a Hellboy style of we're guarding this world against everyone else.
Exactly. You think of the Oath of the Watchers as the planar cops. You can visit, but
don't destroy the cities.
Hey, aberration, please do not extract brains while you're visiting.
So some of their powers, they've got some channel divinity options here as well. Extra alertness and their vigilance. And I of course, it's because it's level 20. I always jump to the big, juicy ability of the mental bulwark.
Yes, where they have true sight, they have advantage on their attack rolls against these extraplanar beings, and they also can just whack somebody and say, get out of here, and banish them back to their home plane. Really, again, fulfilling this sort of class fantasy of the planar cop.
So that is the Paladin subclass, and then we get to the Warlock's Noble Genie.
Yes, so the Noble Genie is a fun exploration of what would happen if your patron as a Warlock was a genie.
Yes.
A genie who has this opulent realm somewhere in the inner planes where you can potentially send people to for the genie to be amused. That's actually one of my favorite things in this subclass is the ability
to go into the vessel.
To send someone away, and basically for the genie to be like, you can imagine sometimes the genie would be like, oh, you're fun, and then other times like, oh boy, you're boring, and hope the ability will expire soon, so you'll get out of the genie's sight. It naturally, because this is leaning into genie lore, big feature of this subclass is selecting a vessel associated with the genie, whether that's an oil lamp, a little hollow statuette, an ornate lantern, and I really love how we explore using that vessel to create a tether between you and another creature. That can be beneficial, or again, you can use it to send people away for a while. You can, gain the elemental resistance of your choice that may or may not be associated with your genie, but certainly is associated with the inner planes where genies typically reside. And I also really love the flavor we have here in the 14th level feature of being able to basically wire money to your patron through your vessel as a part of using Collector's Call, this which again sounds a lot like a collect
Collect
call,
call, yes.
that you use at higher level. This subclass also does something fun that we have not done a whole lot of with our Warlock patrons, and that is we really treat the patron as a sort of concrete being. And what I mean by that is in many of our patron options, the patron we very purposefully treat as this sort of shadowy being that may or may not have any direct involvement in your campaign. We did that on purpose, especially in the player's handbook, because we wanted Warlock players to decide how much they're actually connected to their patron. Because there's actually no requirement in the Warlock class that the Warlock be on good terms with their patron. Because the Warlock, unlike a cleric, a cleric serves their deity. A Warlock made a bargain with somebody. That doesn't mean they have to like each other. They might not be on speaking terms with each other. They signed a contract together.
No, it feels very like episode 4 or 5 Darth Vader and the Emperor. It's almost conceptual out there, and Darth Vader, you don't even know if he likes the guy or not. Right. But that's his patron at the moment.
Yeah. Whereas here, we rather than your patron, being somewhere out there in the multiverse, and you may or may not ever meet them. Here, you are sending them literally to your patrons, these people to your patron's house, or sending money there. It's very concrete, which felt appropriate for a subclass that's also grounded in this very concrete thing of the oil lamp or that kind of thing.
It felt like an interesting story twist for me. You think of a genie, it's usually in the role of their subservient to whoever finds them. They're granting you wishes. They, again, might not like working with you, but they're bound to. And in this case, it's a bit of a role reversal, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, where the genie is the one collecting people and things. And you could almost imagine maybe the Warlock is the one who pops out of the lamp.
Right. Well, now I can imagine the genie is the middleman here, sends you on quest because it has to fulfill that wish for somebody else.
Right.
I need you to go find this thing because I owe it to this other group.
Yeah. And by the way, those of you watching, if you're curious to know more about genies in D&D, take a look at the Monster Manual. We have a whole section on them because they are really fun parts of the D&D multiverse and have always been part of it. It's funny, people will look at the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide and think that tall red being with the horns is some kind of fiend.
Yes.
It's not. It's a genie. That is one of the Afriti. And with if on the back cover is the City of Brass. So I remember that because growing up during the Satanic Panic and having somebody looking at that cover and see, look, there's even a devil on this book, and I was the kid, sort of pushing up his glasses. Actually, that's a genie, and that is not hell on the back. That is the plane of fire.
I'm sure you convinced them the innocence of the game with that.
Yes.
Well, we're getting close to 2 o'clock here at the top of the hour. We've touched very briefly on the 4 new subclasses that have appeared in the most recent Unearthed Arcana. So I will mention for folks that do have questions regarding this or any other Unearthed Arcana, if you got a moment, please do put it in chat. Our moderators have been diligently collecting the questions and sending them our way, so thank you very much for that. And we try and get through as many as we can. If we don't get to your question, hopefully we will in a future date. In the meantime, I will just reiterate the Unearthed Arcana subclasses Part 1 is available now on the D&D website. We'll also make sure to re-mention it in our next issue of Dragon Plus, which releases at the end of February. We had our December issue come out, and so we're going to wait until February for issue 30 as well. So on behalf of myself, thanks for everyone for tuning in. And for the PAX South game, you can watch that now. We won't give any spoilers, so watch it on YouTube. I was
on
watching
YouTube now.
And of course, the Twitch PAX channel in the video archives was where I was catching that. So.
It's a crazy episode.
Oh, they all are, in a good, in a delightful way. So we'll see you again next time, and we'll see Jeremy next time as well.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.